Well, more on Victoria's frantic efforts to contain the latest outbreak, large numbers today, and everything else happening around the country. And joined from Canberra by political editor of the Australian newspaper, Dennis Shanahan. Dennis, I want to talk to you about the politics of the situation in Victoria. You touched a bit on this in your column today, where you said that the latest outbreak in suburban Melbourne Maidstone, while still thankfully small, has the potential to pose a much greater threat, political threat to the federal coalition, because it involves the vaccination rollout. Now, I know Labor want to make this all the PM's fault, but if it is the fault of a slow vaccination, I say if, not that it is, but if, then it's the same slow rollout right across the country. Why then is only Victoria back into lockdown and not other states?
Well, that's quite right, Peter. Once again, Victoria has invoked a statewide lockdown. Other states have had breakouts. They haven't had statewide lockdowns. New South Wales has had hotspots and managed to do it without a lockdown. And I think Victoria's claim that, the federal government should now bail out Victoria for yet another breakout, reinstituting JobKeeper is really a bit rich from the Victorian government. And also on this point, I think the point I was making today was that it will be more difficult for Scott Morrison to avoid the political fallout of this breakout in Victoria, partly because it was absolutely open and shut case who was responsible for the first disaster last year, which cost the lives of more than 800 people. It was the state government. Now, I'm not saying Scott Morrison is responsible for this or has to bear responsibility, but the politics have changed because part of the circumstances now are that vaccines are available, vaccines have been given, and also the realisation that in this case, we've actually had a nurse who was vaccinated, she had a first shot of Pfizer, who then became infected and has then apparently passed on the infection. Now, so far, that has not been as bad as the outbreak last year. But these are all issues that the federal government is going to have to address because vaccination is now an issue where it wasn't last year.
Yeah, but just let me pick you up on that, because the federal government's responsible for the vaccination supply, getting it into the country, choosing the vaccine type and getting it into the country. But the rollout in these mass vaccination centres outside of GP networks are, federally funded, but outside of the GP networks, in these mass centres, and I went to two of them on Saturday, another one on Sunday morning, it's chaos, right? You can't get on the online portal. It doesn't exist. They said it was, but it's not going to be there for a couple of weeks. The hotline, you can sit there all day if you like, but it completely rings out. People are having a lot of trouble getting a book in. So they're turning up to walk-ins. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of people standing around for 4 or 5 hours, no social distancing, supposed to be locked up, likely to pass on any virus if they've got it, all managed by the state government. Now, once you get into the centres, you've got hospital workers from, say, the Royal Melbourne Hospital or whatever, running it very, very professionally. But the front end, the booking, the turning up, the lines, that's all the Victorian state government. They just can't get it right. Why then will Scott Morrison wear that with the public?
Well, again, Peter, I'm not saying he should. I'm saying it is a risk for the federal government. The last time the government got off, if you give the pun, scot-free. The federal government was not blamed, and quite rightly so. They were not blamed for the first outbreak. I'm saying this is much more politically complicated now because of the vaccine rollout. Now, I think that your experience in Victoria, I had an experience in the ACT recently where everything went very smoothly at the COVID vaccination sites, very professional, very ordered, everyone keeping their distance and so forth. There is a big difference to the other states and territories to Victoria. No doubt about that. The other thing is, of course, that a lot of those lines now in Victoria are because of a panic after the latest outbreak. And so I think that, we have to look at all of this in perspective. Also, Labor's argument that Australia is 113th in the world as far as vaccine is concerned is a nonsense. It's a statistical flub. What they're trying to say is compare us to countries which have massive outbreaks and emergency and compulsory vaccinations. It's not the same, but all I'm saying is the federal government needs to be alert that on the economic front they're doing the right thing. They have to make sure they stand steady on the health side.
Yeah, and of course, federal Labor know they've got to hold seats in Victoria. I mean, they can't, lose out in Queensland and not hold what they've got in Victoria to win the next election. And of course, they're very invested. They'll go to the polls federally before the state government in Victoria goes to the polls. So I think partly the push to make this Morrison's problem is coming from Albanese and federal Labor. It's a smart political play. You and I both get that. Will Josh Frydenberg, you think, hold firm on the money?
My view is that Josh Frydenberg will hold very firm on the money. Look, as Treasurer, particularly during the pandemic, poor old Josh Frydenberg hasn't had much of a chance to be Dr. No. He's had to open up billions and deficits and debt and all this sort of stuff and do all sorts of job support and welfare payments. I think on this occasion, he'll be backed well and truly by the Prime Minister and the rest of the Cabinet in saying no to Victoria. Why should Victoria receive special treatment, different treatment to the other states who didn't even seek an extension of the job seeker or creation of a new job seeker program? No, I think Josh Frydenberg will be very determined on not reopening JobKeeper in Victoria.
Hannah, just a quick one before you go. Our PM's over in New Zealand. The thorny issue of the deportation of New Zealand criminals back to their own country, out of Australia if they've committed the crime here, was again raised by Jacinda Ardern. Let's have a listen.
That's not a law that applies specifically to New Zealand or any other country. It is a universal position of Australian law.
We've, of course, reiterated our ongoing view on the issue of the cancellation of citizenship on issues of deportation. Prime Minister Morrison and I have had these exchanges before. He's very clear on New Zealand's view.
Of course, they're not cancelling citizenship. If they had citizenship, they'd be here. They haven't had citizenship. That's why they're being sent home to their country. But help me out here. Ardern says, she's willing to take all the illegal arrivals out of Manus and Nauru who came to Australia by boat a few years back. But we want to send them back to their home countries, of course. She wants all of them, but she's refusing to accept her own people back to her own country. Now, that doesn't add up to me.
Look, this is a thorny political issue in New Zealand, which we in Australia tend not to appreciate the depth of feeling about it. And let's face it, at this meeting, the first overseas trip that Scott Morrison had taken, first meeting between the New Zealand and Australian leaders for some time, which really was all about trying to settle down potential differences and between Australia and New Zealand over China, which were settled. New Zealand has indicated that they will join with Australia in defending us against the Chinese barley dumping charges before the WTO. So the really important stuff got put through there. And I think once again, Jacinda Ardern has demonstrated that at these joint press conferences, she's only too happy. The last time she did it, it was beside Sydney Harbour, opposite the Opera House, where she had another go at Scott Morrison over this deportation issue. It is just going to go on and on, but the real issues between Australia and New Zealand were actually very well dealt with at the meeting, and I think a lot of this is grandstanding to the New Zealand domestic audience.